In this video, we'll be talking about the render settings in Cinema 4D, how to use the global illumination, the ambient occlusion, and how to save your render images. And this scene that you're looking right here is also attached into the asset folder. You can browse and find it, and then you open it so that you can go along as we set up. Now, to render a scene in Cinema 4D, you need to make some render settings. Okay, so when you go up here, this is where we have the render settings. When you click it, a new window will come. The render settings window will come, and by default, you might be in the standard render. Okay, the standard render, it's the fastest render in Cinema 4D. Is standard. It's not physically accurate. You can use it to render some beautiful renders if you really tweak it well. But if you want the physically accurate render, then you have to use the physical render. These are the two renders that comes with Cinema 4D, the standard and the physical. So let's start with the standard. Okay, so with the standard render, when you set it to it, when you hit this is the render view, it will render our object. So this is what our scene looks like. Okay, this is a standard render. For now, it's just rendering a faster preview for us. Okay. Now there are some settings inside the standard render that you can set. You have the output. The output is actually the resolution in which your render you render your image. So with this lipstick project, we have 1000 by 1000 resolution. You can change it to any resolution that you want, but we chose 1000 by 1000 because it's a social media product shot advert. Okay, so we made it 1000 by 1000. And then we have the save. This is where you will choose where to save your render files. Okay, so by default it's blank, so you can click browse and then you can locate where you want to save your render files, give it a name and then save. Okay, so that is, and then we have the format. Okay, you have the chance to choose the format that you want to save your renders in. Okay, we have PNG, we have PSD, we have JPEG, we have EXR. So all the formats are here. You can choose those formats, and you have the depth. Okay, those who are good in Photoshop, you know the depth that I'm talking about. We have the 8-bit depth and then the 16-bit depth channel. This depth actually saves your image with a high color depth, so that if you want to manipulate them in Photoshop, you can have a wide gamut to manipulate your colors. Okay, if you use 16 bits, okay, by normal it's 8 bits. Okay, and the name sequence, this is how, if you're rendering an animation, this is how the name sequence goes. So you choose the way that you want it. You want the name sequence to be like this, so you choose the default name sequence that you want. Okay, and we have alpha channel. What the alpha channel does is that if you are rendering an image that you don't want to have a background, or you don't have any background in the image, so you want the image to render with an alpha channel, which is a transparent background, you can use this channel to set the alpha channel, and you have the straight, either the straight alpha or you separate the alpha. Okay, those are the two. If you have straight alpha, the image will be saved and have an alpha channel, like a transparent channel. Okay, but if you separate the alpha, it will create layer marks of an alpha that you can use in Photoshop or After Effects to actually give the image a transparent an alpha this thing. Okay, and then we have the multi-pass image. The multi-pass image is when you want to render multiple passes of your project. Okay, let's say you want to store the shadows in a separate file, you want to store the reflections in a separate file, you want to store each object in a separate file. This is why we have the multipass. Okay, and you need to enable the multipass in your Cinema 4D project so that you can render to those multipass. And what we use multipass for is later on, if you want to composite them together, you have the chance of manipulating each passes. Okay, so if you after rendering, you know that, oh, my shadows are so dark, I want to brighten it, you have only all the shadow files, only the shadow files, so you have the chance to actually change the brightness of it. So that is what the multipass is used for. It gives you multiple passes of your image. Okay, the passes that you set. In other renders, it's called AOVs. Okay, and we also have a composites project files. This one will save a certain file if you are going to use the project inside. If you are going to composite your project inside an After Effect, it will create a certain file that you can load into an After Effect so that you can manipulate it. You also can choose Nuke, Motion, and Fusion. These are all softwares. Okay, Fusion is DaVinci Resolve's compositing software, Fusion. Okay, here. With our scene, we are not going to composite it anywhere. It's just a picture that we have. We don't want to do a multi-pass on it. We want everything to be rendered, and then we can do some adjustments in Photoshop on the actual picture. Okay, so this is the settings that we go with. And then when you come here, we have something called effects. This is where you can add effects onto the render. Okay, so let's do a simple render. You see, this is my render. Okay, by default, my area light that I'm using, the key light, it has shadows. Okay, so let's say I don't have shadows. I have no shadows on it. When I render, this is what it happens. There's no shadows. Okay, there's another effect here. There's an effect here called ambient occlusion. Here, ambient occlusion. Okay, what this does is that it creates a fake shadow at any part that two objects meet. Okay, so with the ambient occlusion on, remember the light has no shadows now, remember. Okay, so let's hit render, and you see that it's creating some form of fake shadow, okay, where this object touches the floor. Okay, so that is what the ambient occlusion does. So you can use the ambient occlusion to fake shadows. Okay, this helps in render faster with ambient occlusion because there's no shadows being calculated. These are all fake shadows. Okay, but if you want picture perfect, like picture perfect renders, I don't recommend using the ambient occlusion. But if you are doing some renders that are like stylized renders, then you need to use the ambient occlusion to trick Cinema 4D to put some fake shadows there, because the area shadows takes a longer time to calculate. This scene is simple, so it doesn't really take longer time to calculate, but if you have a bigger scene, it takes a little bit of time to calculate. Okay, so let's disable it, and then we have something we call the global illumination. This one here, what it does is that it helps bounce the lights around. Okay, it helps bounce the light around. Okay, so with that selected, let's turn back the shadows of our light. Okay, area. Okay, what the global illumination does is that it helps bounces lights around. Okay, so when the area light from the top here hits this object here, it will bounce and hit another object and bounce, so it helps the lights bounce around. Okay, so with a global illumination selected, let's hit render and see what happens. You see, it's calculating the light bounce catch, it's calculating it, and then after it calculates it, it will render it. And you see now that our render is bright. Okay, we are only using one light, but now the render is bright. Okay, so you use this effect according to your preference. Okay, if you want it to help you with your lights, you want it to bounce around to create a very nice feel to your light, you can use it. But in this case, this product is black. We don't want the lights bouncing around. That's why we use only one light and a sky object. Okay, so in this case, we don't need the global illumination, because if you do, you see the color has changed from black to gray. Okay, because the lights were bouncing around so much because of the global illumination. Okay, so let's disable it. You hit render, and you see we have the black back. Okay, we don't want any bouncing of the light because we have already set up our light perfectly, and then we have a sky object that is dealing with the reflections here. Okay, so those are the effects of it. We have other effects called the glow and other stuff, the denoiser and everything. So those effects you can actually add on it. So with the glow effect, I don't know if you see it perfectly here because it actually have, okay, you see it's there. You see there's this kind of bloom happening at the highest highlight. Okay, I don't know if you see well, but if you render with the glow effect on your machine, you see it. You see this bloom, like this glow on those highlighted, those places with highlights. Okay, thank you. So that is all about the render settings in Cinema 4D. So next step, we are going to render our object. Okay, and then to render settings, we have to change from the standard to the physical, because we want to render a very great picture, a really perfect picture, because this is a real world object and they want it as perfect as possible. They want it to match their physical product. Okay, so we need to use the physical render. Okay, and then with the physical render selected, you go to options. You have all the settings here you can change. Okay, you can change the reflection depth. 5 is okay. You can also change the ray depth 15 is okay. Now let's select the physical render itself down here, right here. Okay, and then we have something we call fixed, adaptive, and progressive. Okay, fixed is that if it renders with a fixed settings that you choose here. Okay, so if you are previewing, you can set it to preview, and then you can just render, and it will render with just the preview. You see it's very noisy. You see there's so much noise inside it. Okay, but let's change it from to progressive. What progressive does is that it will keep on rendering the image until it's sharper, until you feel comfortable. Okay, this is the sharper image, this is what I want. Okay, so I'll stop here. But progressive, what it does is it will just keep on rendering and rendering and rendering until you stop it yourself. So that is progressive. Okay. And then we have something called the adaptive. The adaptive uses the bucket system. Okay, let's set this sampling to 5. The adaptive uses the bucket system. Okay, what it does is that when I hit render right now, you see this bucket is rendering a bucket system. Okay, so that is the adaptive version, and we can set the quality. Okay, so with this product I want really a high quality, so I'll set it to high, and then advanced. Okay, I'm good with everything. Then go to the save. I'll choose where I want to save it. So I'll give it a name here. This is where I want to save it. Okay, now when I'm done with the render settings, I'll close it. You see my render settings is here. I can choose to save this render settings as a preset, so anytime that I'm rendering, it will use the settings that I set. But remember, when you set it as a preset and you have the location where you want to save your object here, anytime you render, it will overwrite it. Okay, so I'll suggest that anytime you want to render, you come here and choose a different location and render. Okay, now let's close this render settings, and then we come here. This is where the magic happens. Okay, so this first render view, it renders inside your viewport. This will give you the lowest quality. Okay, and then we have the render to picture viewer. Okay, this is where you do your final render. Okay, so when you click this, another window will open, and then it will start rendering. It will take a little bit of time because this is rendering your highest image possible. Okay, so let's give it a time, and then when it finishes rendering, you will see we continue. Okay, now our render is done. See, we have our render, and it will be saved at the location that you choose when you were in the render settings. So that is it for rendering settings in Cinema 4D, and that covers it for the fundamentals of Cinema 4D. In our next videos, we'll be looking at building 10 project works from start to finish using the skills you've learned right now. Thank you, and see you in those videos.